I'll never forget the feeling of cold metal handcuffs biting into my wrists as FBI agents surrounded me in that government office. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the bewildered faces of other people waiting in line. I had come here, desperate, broken, seeking the last shred of help available to someone like me, someone who had fallen through every crack in the system. Instead, alarms blared, armed officers shouted commands, and within seconds, I was face down on the linoleum floor, being read my rights for a crime I didn't even understand. Federal identity fraud. Impersonating a missing person. My mind couldn't process the words. I was Claire Hatcher, wasn't I? That's the name I'd known for 29 years. That's who I thought I was. But as they hauled me into that interrogation room, as Special Agent Patricia Morris slid a faded photograph across the metal table, everything I thought I knew about my existence shattered like glass. Before we continue, if you're finding this story compelling, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling me what you think happens next. Your support means everything and helps me share more stories like this. Let me take you back to where it all began, to the night that set my entire life on this dark, twisted path. I was 18 years old, and it was supposed to be a celebration. My 18th birthday should have marked freedom, adulthood, new beginnings. Instead, it marked the night I learned that I had never truly had a home at all. The snow was falling heavily that February evening, thick, white flakes that made the world outside our run-down suburban house look deceptively peaceful. Inside, there was no peace. There never had been, but I had convinced myself that if I just tried harder, loved them more, made myself more useful, things would change. Mark, the man I called my stepfather, stood in the doorway of my tiny bedroom, his face twisted with rage. He wasn't a large man, but his anger always made him seem to fill entire rooms. Linda, my mother, hovered behind him in the hallway, wringing her hands but saying nothing. She never said anything when it mattered. "You're 18 now." Mark spat, his voice dripping with venom. "That means I've done my duty. I've fed you, put a roof over your worthless head for 18 years. You think I wanted that? You think I wanted to waste my money on some parasite who isn't even my blood? I stood there in my warm pajamas, feeling my heart hammering against my ribs. "Please, I'll get another job. I'll pay rent. I just need a little more time to save up." His laugh was cruel, cutting through me like a blade. "Save up with what money? Everything you've managed to scrape together barely covers the food you eat." He turned and grabbed something from the hallway. My ceramic piggy bank, the one I'd been filling with spare change and small bills for 3 years, came flying through the air. It smashed against the wall behind me, exploding into pieces. Coins scattered across the floor, rolling under the bed, bouncing off furniture. Mark walked over and began picking up the bills, shoving them into his pocket. "Consider this back payment for all the years I had to look at your face. Cost of raising you, you parasitic little leech." "Mom, please!" I turned to Linda, tears streaming down my face. "Please, don't let him do this." Linda's eyes were wet too, but when she opened her mouth, all that came out was, "Mark's right, honey. You're an adult now. It's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet. Then she turned away, her shoulders shaking. Mark grabbed my old suitcase from the closet and began throwing my clothes into it, not bothering to fold anything. "Get out. Now. Tonight. I've done my part and I'm done with you." "But it's snowing. It's the middle of winter. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. Should have thought about that before you decided to be born and ruin my life." He shoved the half-packed suitcase into my arms, grabbed my shoulder, and physically pushed me toward the stairs. I stumbled down the steps, my mind reeling, unable to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. Yes, Mark had always been cold, always been harsh, but this was something else entirely. At the bottom of the stairs, he opened the front door, and a blast of Arctic wind and snow hit me in the face. I wasn't even wearing proper clothes, just thin pajamas and socks. "Please, at least let me get my coat, my boots." He threw the suitcase out into the snow-covered yard. "You've got what you need. Now get out before I throw you out." I looked back one last time at Linda, still standing at the top of the stairs. "Mum!" She turned her back on me and walked away. I heard a door close somewhere in the house. Mark grabbed my arm and shoved me out onto the front porch, then slammed the door behind me. I heard the deadbolt click into place. I stood there in the freezing cold snow, already soaking through my thin clothes, staring at the closed door. My hands were shaking, whether from cold or the shock, I couldn't tell. I walked out to where my suitcase lay in the snow, picked it up and started walking. I didn't know where I was going, I just walked. That night, I slept in a 24-hour laundromat, huddled between two dryers trying to stay warm. It was the first night of what would become 11 years of surviving rather than living. In those 11 years, I worked every job I could find. I waited tables at diners, cleaned houses, stocked shelves at grocery stores overnight, anything that would pay. I slept in my car, when I could afford one in shelters, when I couldn't occasionally on a friend's couch, when I managed to make a friend who didn't disappear when they saw how broken my life really was. But no matter how hard I worked, I could never get ahead. Money slipped through my fingers like water. I'd save $100 only to have my car break down and cost $200 to fix. I'd finally afford a security deposit on an apartment only to be rejected because my credit score was abysmal. And I couldn't understand why. I had never owned a credit card, never taken out a loan. I paid everything in cash or with my debit card. How could I have bad credit? The collection letters started arriving at the shelter where I received mail. First one, then another, then. They came in floods. Credit card companies demanding payment on accounts I'd never opened. Loan servicers threatening legal action for money I'd never borrowed. Amounts that made my head spin. $20,000. $35,000. Numbers that felt like prison sentences. I tried to dispute them, spent hours on the phone with customer service representatives who treated me like a liar. "Ma'am, these accounts were opened without your social security number, your date of birth, your signature." But they weren't. I had never signed anything. The signatures didn't even look like mine. It took months of digging, months of fighting through bureaucratic red tape before I found the truth. Mark had been using my identity since I was 18. He had taken my social security number, the one Linda had obtained using falsified documents years ago, and opened credit lines in my name. He had taken out payday loans I'd never see a cent of. He had run up debts that were legally mine, even though I'd never made a single purchase. He was still draining me, still feeding off my life like a vampire, even though I hadn't seen him in over a decade. I couldn't escape him. His theft of my identity had become a chain around my neck, dragging me down no matter how hard I tried to swim. By the time I turned 29, I was working 3 jobs simultaneously. I woke up at 4 in the morning to clean office buildings before the employees arrived. At 8, I'd rush to my waitressing shift at a family diner, serving breakfast and lunch until 3. Then, I'd go home, sleep for maybe an hour if I was lucky, and show up at the warehouse at 5 for the evening shift packing boxes until midnight or later. 4 hours of sleep if I was fortunate, then back up to do it all again. My body ached constantly. My hands were raw and cracked from cleaning chemicals. My feet felt like they were made of broken glass. But I kept going because stopping meant homelessness, meant hunger, meant complete collapse. I had to keep moving. Then came the accident. It was a Tuesday evening at the warehouse. I was exhausted, running on coffee and adrenaline, moving boxes of merchandise that seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. I was standing on a ladder reaching for a box on a high shelf when I lost my balance. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe the ladder was faulty. Maybe it was just bad luck, the kind that had followed me my entire life. But I fell. I remember the sensation of falling, the split second of weightlessness before I hit the concrete floor. My left arm took the worst of it. I heard the crack before I felt the pain, a sound like a branch snapping. Then the agony hit white hot and all-consuming, radiating from my wrist up through my entire body. My co-workers called an ambulance. I was sobbing not just from pain but from fear. I couldn't afford this. I had health insurance through one of my jobs, bare minimum coverage that still took a chunk out of my paycheck, but even with insurance, emergency room visits were expensive. I didn't have savings. I didn't have anything. The EMTs loaded me into the ambulance and we rushed through the city streets, sirens wailing. At the hospital, they took me into an examination room. A nurse started checking my vitals and a doctor came in to assess my arm. The wrist was definitely broken, possibly in multiple places. They'd need x-rays, possibly surgery, definitely a cast, and weeks of physical therapy. Then everything fell apart. A different nurse came in holding a clipboard, her expression apologetic but firm. "Ms. Hatcher, I'm sorry, but there's a problem with your insurance." "What kind of problem?" Panic rose in my throat. "According to our system, your insurance policy was terminated 3 months ago due to suspected fraud. We can't proceed with treatment until this is resolved. You'll need to either provide a valid insurance card or agree to self-pay." "Fraud? I don't understand. I've been paying my premiums. I have insurance. I need help. My arm is broken." The nurse looked genuinely sympathetic. "I understand and I'm sorry, but hospital policy is clear. We've administered emergency stabilization, but any further treatment requires either valid insurance or payment up front." "How much would that cost?" She glanced at her paperwork. "For the x-rays, setting the bone cast, and follow-up care, you're looking at approximately $8,000. Possibly more if surgery is required." $8,000. I made maybe $25,000 a year, working myself into the ground at 3 jobs. I had $300 in my bank account. $8,000 might as well have been $8 million. "I can't be that. Please, isn't there anything you can do?" The nurse shook her head. "I'm sorry. You'll need to contact your insurance company and resolve the fraud issue. Until then, the best I can do is give you a temporary splint and some pain medication. You'll need to seek treatment elsewhere." They gave me a splint made of cardboard and elastic bandages, a prescription for ibuprofen that I couldn't afford to fill, and discharge papers. My arm was screaming in pain, improperly set, and I walked out of that hospital feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. I couldn't work. A broken wrist meant I couldn't clean, couldn't carry trays, couldn't lift boxes. I called my jobs and explained the situation, but only the diner was willing to hold my position for a few weeks. The other 2 jobs let me go immediately. No work meant no money. No money meant I couldn't pay rent on the tiny studio apartment I'd finally managed to secure after years of homelessness. I was falling again, and there was no bottom in sight. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I swallowed my pride, pushed down my fear, and decided to apply for temporary government assistance. Just until my arm healed. Just until I could work again. It felt like admitting defeat, but I was out of options. I had no family to turn to, no friends who could help, nowhere else to go. I walked into the social services office on a grey Monday morning, clutching my paperwork in my good hand. The waiting room was crowded with people who looked as desperate as I felt. I took a number and sat down, preparing myself for the long wait, for the invasive questions, for the shame of having to ask for help. When my number was finally called, I approached the window with my documents. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, took my application and began entering my information into her computer. I watched her expression change from bored neutrality to confusion, then to alarm. "Ma'am, please wait here for a moment." She got up and disappeared into a back office. My stomach twisted. Something was wrong. Something was always wrong. She came back with a supervisor, and they both looked at me with expressions I couldn't read. "Miss Hatcher, I need you to stay calm and remain where you are." "Okay." "What's going on? Is there a problem with my application?" The supervisor didn't answer. Instead, he picked up a phone and made a call, speaking in low tones I couldn't hear. My heart started racing. The other people in the waiting room were starting to stare. Then I heard the sirens. Police cars pulled up outside the building. Officers came through the doors, hands on their weapons, scanning the room. One of them pointed at me. "Claire Hatcher." "Yes, that's me. What's happening?" "Ma'am, you need to come with us. Put your hands where I can see them." "What?" "Why I haven't done anything wrong." But they weren't listening. 2 officers approached me, and before I could process what was happening, before I could even think to run or resist or do anything at all, they spun me around and cuffed my hands behind my back. The metal was cold and tight against my skin. And when they pulled my broken wrist back, the pain was so intense that I cried out, "Please, my arm is broken. Please be careful." They ignored me. They read me my rights words I'd only heard on television, words that didn't seem real. I had the right to remain silent. Anything I said could be used against me in a court of law. I had the right to an attorney. "What am I being charged with?" My voice came out as a whisper. "Federal identity fraud, impersonation of a missing person. You'll be informed of all charges at the station." They walked me out in handcuffs past all those staring faces and put me in the back of a police car. I sat there in shock, my mind blank, unable to form coherent thoughts. This had to be a mistake, some kind of horrible, nightmarish mistake. At the police station, they processed me like I was a common criminal. Fingerprints, photographs, personal belongings confiscated. Then they put me in an interrogation room, a small windowless space with a metal table and uncomfortable chairs. I sat there for what felt like hours, my broken wrist throbbing, my mind spiraling into darker and darker places. Finally, the door opened and a woman walked in. She was in her 50s, wearing a dark suit, her grey, streaked hair pulled back in a professional bun. She carried a thick file folder and had an FBI badge clipped to her belt. "Ms. Hatcher, I'm Special Agent Patricia Morris with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." She sat down across from me and opened the folder. "I need to ask you some questions." I don't understand what's happening. I haven't committed any crimes. I just went to apply for assistance because I'm injured and I lost my jobs." She held up a hand, stopping me. "I know you're confused. I know you're scared, but I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." She pulled out a photograph from the folder, an age-progressed computer rendering of a child's face. "Do you recognise this person?" I looked at the image. It showed a young woman, maybe late 20s, with light brown hair and hazel eyes. There was something familiar about the face, something in the shape of the eyes and the curve of the mouth. "It looks a little bit like me, I guess." Agent Morris nodded slowly. "It looks like you because it is you. Or rather, it's a computer projection of what you would look like now, based on photographs taken when you were 6 months old." My blood ran cold. "I don't understand." She pulled out another photograph, this one old and faded, showing a smiling baby girl in someone's arms. "This is Claire Elizabeth Palmer. She was taken from a shopping mall in Connecticut on March 15th, 1996. Her parents, Michael and Jennifer Palmer, have been searching for her for 29 years. Every year, the FBI updates the age progression photographs, hoping someone will recognise her." She looked at me intently. "When your information went into the system today, it triggered multiple red flags. Your biometric data, your facial structure, even small identifying marks like the birthmark on your left shoulder blade, they all match Claire Palmer's records." I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was spinning. "That's not possible. I'm Claire Hatcher. My mother is Linda Hatcher. My father, my stepfather, is Mark Hatcher. The name Claire Hatcher doesn't exist in any official capacity prior to 1996. The social security number you've been using belonged to a different child who died in 1994. Someone stole that dead child's identity and used it to create papers for you. DNA testing will confirm what we already know. But, Ms. Hatcher, I'm not here to arrest you for fraud. You're not a criminal." She leaned forward, her expression softening. "You're a victim. You were kidnapped as a baby. The people you've been calling your parents are not your parents. They stole you from your real family." The words hit me like physical blows. Each sentence felt impossible, yet somewhere deep inside pieces were clicking into place. The way Mark had always treated me like I was worthless, like I was an intruder in his home. The way Linda could never quite meet my eyes. The absence of baby pictures, of extended family, of any roots or history. The way nothing had ever quite made sense. "I want to call them," I said, my voice shaking. "I want to talk to Linda and Mark." Agent Morris shook her head. We tried. When we ran the background check and realised what had happened, we sent agents to their last known address. They're gone. The house is empty. They ran. Of course they ran. Of course they did. Even now, even after everything, they were abandoning me. Again. What happens now? I asked. Now we contact your real parents. We arrange for DNA testing to confirm what we already know. And then, if you're willing, we reunite you with the family who has never stopped looking for you. I sat in that interrogation room for another hour while Agent Morris made phone calls and filled out paperwork. My mind was a storm of emotions I couldn't name. Anger at the people who had stolen me. Grief for the childhood I should have had. Fear of meeting strangers who expected me to be their daughter. Confusion about who I even was anymore. The DNA test was quick, just a cheek swab that took seconds. But the wait for results felt eternal. I was released from custody but told not to leave the city. I went back to my tiny apartment, sat on my second-hand couch and stared at the wall, trying to process the impossible truth. The results came back 3 days later. 99.9% probability that I was Claire Elizabeth Palmer, daughter of Michael James Palmer and Jennifer Louise Palmer. It was official, documented, undeniable. The FBI arranged a meeting at their field office. They said my real parents were flying in from Connecticut. Agent Morris picked me up from my apartment, and during the drive she briefed me on the Palmer family. Michael Palmer was a prominent attorney, respected in his field with a reputation for taking on cases involving child welfare and family rights. After I was taken, he had devoted much of his career to reforming laws around missing children. Jennifer Palmer had founded a non-profit organisation dedicated to finding missing and exploited children, turning her grief into action. They had never given up searching for me. They had spent millions of dollars on private investigators, worked closely with the FBI, and kept my case alive in the media even as years turned into decades. I had a brother too. Ethan was 2 years older than me. Agent Morris showed me recent photos. He was a doctor, now working in pediatrics. The family had continued on without me, but they had never forgotten me. Every birthday, they held a small memorial. Every Christmas, Jennifer lit a candle for me. They had kept my nursery intact for 10 years before finally painfully converting it into something else. When we arrived at the FBI building, Agent Morris led me to a conference room. They're waiting inside. Take all the time you need. There's no rush, no pressure. This is your reunion, and it happens on your terms. I stood outside that door for a full minute, my hand on the handle, trying to find the courage to turn it. Finally, I pushed it open. 3 people stood up as I entered. A tall man in his late 50s with greying hair and kind eyes. A woman about the same age, blonde hair mixed with silver, her hand pressed to her mouth. A younger man, early 30s, who looked at me with an expression of wonder and disbelief. For a moment, nobody moved. We all just stood there looking at each other across the space of 29 stolen years. Then, Jennifer Palmer made a sound something between a sob and a laugh, and she crossed the room in 3 quick steps and wrapped her arms around me. I stiffened at first, not used to being hugged, not used to being touched with anything resembling affection. But she held on, and slowly I brought my good arm up and hugged her back. "My baby," she whispered against my hair. "My baby girl, you're alive. You're really alive." Michael approached more cautiously. His eyes wet with tears he was trying to control. "Claire," he said my name, my real name, with such tenderness. "We never stopped looking for you. Not for one single day." Ethan stayed back, giving me space, but his face showed every emotion he was feeling. Joy, shock, grief for all the years we'd lost hope for what might come next. We sat down around the conference table and they asked if I was okay with them asking questions. I nodded and the conversation began. They wanted to know everything. Where had I been? What had happened to me? Were the people who took me still alive? I told them the truth, all of it. About Mark and Linda, about the poverty and abuse, about being thrown out at 18, about the 11 years of barely surviving. I told them about the identity theft, about Mark still using my stolen social security number to ruin my credit and leave me buried in debt I'd never incurred. I showed them my broken wrist still in its makeshift splint and explained how I'd been denied medical care because Mark had somehow managed to cancel my insurance, probably to cover his own tracks. With every word, I watched Michael's expression harden, his hands clenched into fists on the table. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, visibly trying to control his anger. Nah, he finally said, his voice low and dangerous. This man who stole you, who abused you, who threw you out and continued to destroy your life from a distance. He's going to pay for every single thing he did to you. I promise you that. I will use every resource I have, every connection, every legal tool at my disposal. He will face justice. Jennifer reached across the table and took my hand, the one that wasn't injured. You're not alone anymore, sweetheart. You have us now. You have a family who loves you, who has always loved you even when we didn't know where you were. Everything is going to be different now. I wanted to believe her, but 29 years of disappointment had taught me not to trust in good things. Good things didn't happen to people like me. Except maybe, just maybe I wasn't that person anymore. Maybe I never had been. Maybe Claire Hatcher, the girl who was kicked out in the snow, the girl who couldn't catch a break, the girl who was cursed with bad luck. Maybe that girl was a fiction. Maybe I was always Claire Palmer and I just didn't know it. Over the next few weeks, I learned what it meant to have a family who actually cared. Michael hired the best doctors to properly treat my wrist, which required surgery to correct the damage from improper healing. Jennifer helped me move my few belongings out of my depressing studio apartment and into their guest house, a space larger and nicer than anywhere I'd ever lived. Ethan took time off from his medical practice to spend time with me, helping me adjust, answering my questions about our family history, showing me photographs from my infancy. They didn't push. They understood that I needed time to process, time to grieve for the life I should have had, time to wrap my head around the fact that everything I thought I knew about myself was a lie. But while I was healing, Michael was working. True to his word, he was determined to bring Mark and Linda to justice. He hired private investigators who tracked the couple down within a week. They had fled to a small town near the Mexican border, thinking they could eventually slip across and disappear. But they hadn't moved fast enough. When the FBI showed up at their door, Linda apparently broke down immediately, sobbing and confessing everything. Mark tried to fight, even pulling a gun, but he was quickly subdued and arrested. They were both taken into custody and charged with federal kidnapping, child abuse, identity theft, and a dozen other crimes. The media descended on the story like vultures. Missing baby found after 29 years was national news. Reporters tried to interview me, but Michael shielded me from them issuing statements on my behalf while I tried to put my life together in private. There was one person I wanted to help, though. Emily, Mark, and Linda's youngest daughter was only 16 when her parents were arrested. She was Mark's biological child from a previous relationship, not Linda's, and she'd always been different from the rest of the family. Kinder, gentler. She used to sneak food to me when I was younger, back when Mark would punish me by withholding meals. When everything came out, when the truth about her father's crimes became public, Emily called me. Claire, she said, her voice small and scared. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what they did to you. I know you didn't, I told her. None of this is your fault. I don't have anywhere to go. Social services wants to put me in foster care, but I'm so scared. I talked to Michael and Jennifer, and without hesitation, they agreed to take Emily in. They helped her legally emancipate from Mark, became her legal guardians, and enrolled her in a good school. She lived in their home, became like a younger sister to me all over again, but this time in a healthy, loving environment. The trial was a media circus. Cameras surrounded the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, and crowds gathered to watch the proceedings. I had to testify, had to sit in that witness box and relive the worst moments of my life in front of a room full of strangers. But I did it. I looked at Mark across that courtroom and I told the truth about what he'd done. Linda testified too, trying to save herself with tears and remorse. She admitted that she and Mark had been at a shopping mall in Connecticut when they saw me. My mother, Jennifer, had set me down in a stroller for just a moment while she looked at something. Linda, who had recently had a miscarriage and was desperate for a child, saw an opportunity. Mark, who was on the run from various criminal charges, at the time saw a chance to create new identities. They took me, walked out of that mall like I was theirs, and disappeared. For years, they moved around constantly, using fake names and stolen documents. Eventually, they settled down, became bolder, created the identity of Claire Hatcher, using a dead child's social security number. They raised me not out of love, but out of convenience. I was useful. I could clean, cook, and eventually work and bring in money. I was free and a tax deduction. Linda claimed she came to love me over the years, but that her fear of Mark kept her from ever telling the truth or treating me better. The prosecution tore her story apart, showing bank records of money she'd spent on herself and her biological daughter, while I wore second-hand clothes and went hungry, showing medical records of injuries I'd sustained as a child that were never properly treated, showing the record of identity theft that Mark had committed in my name with Linda's knowledge and assistance. When it was time for victim impact statements, I stood before the court one final time. Mark sat at the defendant's table in his orange jumpsuit and shackles his face a mask of barely contained rage. I looked directly at him as I spoke. You told me I wasn't your blood. You told me I was a parasite, a leech, someone who didn't belong in your life. You were right about one thing. I'm not your blood. And thank God for that, because I would rather die than share DNA with someone as cruel, as heartless, and as worthless as you are. You stole 29 years from me. You stole my childhood, my family, my identity, my chances at a normal life. You threw me away like garbage and then continued to torture me from a distance, destroying my credit, ruining my future, making sure I could never escape the hole you'd put me in. But here's what you don't understand. You didn't break me. You made me angry. You made me suffer, but you didn't break me. I survived you, and now I'm going to thrive in spite of you. You will spend the rest of your miserable life in a cage, and I will spend the rest of mine finally free of you. The judge sentenced Mark to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Linda received 25 years with the possibility of parole after 15 if she demonstrated genuine rehabilitation. Mark's face turned purple with rage as the sentence was read. He started shouting screaming threats and obscenities until the guards dragged him out of the courtroom. I learned later that Mark's time in prison was not easy. Federal inmates have a hierarchy, and people who hurt children are at the very bottom. His fellow prisoners learned quickly what he'd done, and they made their disapproval known. He spent most of his time in protective custody, isolated and afraid, which felt like its own form of justice. Linda, on the other hand, became a broken woman. She wrote me letters from prison begging for forgiveness, trying to explain herself. I read the first few, then stopped. Maybe someday I'd be ready to forgive her, but that day wasn't today. I had too much healing to do, too much life to live. The legal battles didn't end with the criminal trial. Michael helped me file civil suits to clear my credit, to document all the fraudulent accounts and loans Mark had taken out in my name. It took months of paperwork and court appearances, but eventually my record was wiped clean. I was no longer drowning in debt I hadn't created. I could start fresh, truly fresh, for the first time in my life. Michael also helped me with the legal process of officially changing my name back to Claire Elizabeth Palmer. I went to court, signed the papers, and received a new birth certificate, new social security card, new driver's license, all with my real name, the name my parents had given me 29 years ago. Jennifer involved me in her non-profit work, showing me the organisation she'd built from her grief and determination. The foundation had helped find dozens of missing children over the years, had provided support to countless families going through the nightmare of having a child disappear. She asked if I'd be willing to share my story publicly, to give hope to other families who are still searching. I agreed, but on my own terms. I gave a single television interview carefully planned and controlled. I talked about what it felt like to discover your entire identity was a lie, to learn that the people you thought were your parents were actually your kidnappers. I talked about survival, about resilience, about the fact that even when life knocks you down repeatedly, you can still get back up. The interview went viral. I received thousands of messages from people all over the world sharing their own stories of survival, thanking me for giving them hope. But the best part of this new life wasn't the media attention or the vindication of seeing my abusers punished. It was the small, everyday moments. It was having Sunday dinners with my family, all of us gathered around a table, laughing and talking. It was Jennifer teaching me how to bake cookies, something she'd always imagined doing with her daughter. It was Michael helping me study for my GED, which I'd never had the chance to complete, and then helping me apply to college. It was Ethan teaching me how to drive properly, since I'd learned from a $50 beta car and a lot of trial and error. It was Emily, my not-quite sister, but not sister, calling me late at night when she had boy troubles or school stress, trusting me with her problems. It was being part of something bigger than myself, being loved not for what I could do or how useful I was, but simply for existing. 6 months after the trial, Jennifer offered me a job at the foundation. My experience made me uniquely qualified to connect with families searching for their missing children. I accepted and discovered I was good at it, helping parents find hope and looking at cases with fresh perspective. 1 year later, I moved into my own apartment. 2 years after that, I enrolled in college at 31 studying social work. I made real friends and even started dating. Through therapy, I learned I had complex PTSD and slowly began to believe I deserved good things. 3 years after my life changed, I stood in my office at the Palmer Foundation. Photos lined the wall behind my desk, telling the story of my journey. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan about dinner at Mum and Dad's. I smiled and confirmed. Looking out at the city, my reflection stared back. Claire Palmer, real whole, and finally free. I thought about Mark rotting in his cell and felt nothing. He was less than nothing to me now. Linda still wrote letters I didn't read. Maybe someday I'd respond, but I didn't owe her forgiveness on anyone's timeline, but my own. What I felt was gratitude. For the family who never stopped searching. For the chance to rebuild. For waking up safe, loved and free. On my desk sat a photo of 18-year-old me, thin and scared in the snow. Jennifer wanted me to throw it away, but I kept it as a reminder of how far I'd come. That girl in the photograph survived things that should have destroyed her. I owed it to her to live the best life possible. So that's what I did. I built relationships, pursued education, helped others, and learned to be happy. The scars remained, but they were proof of survival, not defeat. The suffering shaped. He taught me empathy and resilience. I might never have developed otherwise. I wouldn't be who I am today without that journey, and I genuinely like the person I've become. I'm proud of surviving, of healing, of turning pain into purpose. If my story proves anything, it's that you are not defined by what happens to you. You're defined by what you choose to do with it, whether you let darkness win or fight toward the light. I chose to fight. And I finally understand something I didn't know for 29 years. I deserve to be here. I deserve love, respect, and dignity, not because of what I've achieved, but simply because I exist. The girl thrown out in the snow on her 18th birthday made it. She's standing in her own office, doing meaningful work surrounded by people who love her. Finally home. And if she can make it, so can you. Your value isn't determined by how others treat you. You are valuable simply because you exist. If people abuse you or throw you away, that says everything about them and nothing about you. You deserve better. You deserve love. You deserve respect. And you deserve the courage to walk away from anyone who makes you feel otherwise. So here's my question. What relationship in your life is draining you? What person makes you feel small or worthless? And what would it take for you to finally choose yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters. If this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of survival and strength. Remember, you're not alone in this fight. None of us are.